Okay, welcome back. It is 9/4 of 2015. We're going to continue on with the geometry of the soul, and we did get a little extra content, but not a lot. But we'll review what we have so far with the geometry of the soul, and I'll just emphasize any new content that we run into. We'll take everything in order. We're going to begin with the sentient soul of the imagination, and we do receive the psychical phantasms here from the body, and then we form those into a general network of phantasms that are just loosely bound together but not in any formal structure. But if you look at note 6, it is a new note. The substance of the sentient soul is the rational soul, and so even at the sentient level, we do perform some unconscious or subconscious reasoning. So there is some rational organizational work that takes place here. And that's why there can be a somewhat loosely organized collective of phantasms, because there is still some participation in reason even at the sentient level. From there we go to the possible intellect, where those phantasms are transferred as generalizations, and our agent intellect combines with the possible intellect to raise generalization to signification. So it's kind of a process. Basically, the generalization is grasped by the transcendence of the agent intellect, and it becomes an intelligible object. And then the possible intellect will reflectively grasp the deeper significance of the sensation of the phantasm and raise it up to signification, and also perform some refined ordering according to the hierarchy of signs. But if we take a look at transcendence in 2b to the far right, that agent intellect is the transcendence of our reflective work in the possible intellect. It's basically equal to the divine participation in our souls as the divine substance, or as Holy Spirit. So it is that infusion of our soul by the Spirit of the living God as the active principle of illumination that lives within us as believers. And then if you look at 2c, we see that metaphorically Aquinas refers to angels in heaven, referring to this transcendence, and it refers to first principles of truth, and those are derived for Aquinas from the intellection and word, note 4 there. So this transcendence is something that we acquire through word, and it informs an illumination of a higher spiritual intuition within our hearts and our minds. It helps us to grasp the deeper signification of the mere generalizations or the mere general sensations. We start looking at reality and grasping the spiritual significance of reality. We start grasping the deeper signification of reality. And then we want to take those signs and arrange them in a hierarchy of order, because that same divine transcendent illumination is going to help us to see the order of things ordered according to the kingdom. And so transcendence is an intellection in word, but it's an illumination through word that helps us to grasp signification and to organize signification in a hierarchy of being. So it's a double function that includes the agent intellect and the possible intellect working together in a reciprocal way to form signification and a first sign model. And when we get that first sign model, we're going to move on up to the Dokunta threshold, which is really Aristotle's term for any community of dialogue. It's where we gather in community and we engage in dialogue in refining our sign model in comparison to other individuals who also posit a sign model. We compare our significations, We compare the way that we grasp reality. We compare the way that we grasp an event. Some people will be able to envision the past of the event. Some will envision the future of the event. Some will concentrate on the present of the event. But we'll get a lot more signification and depth of meaning by considering the temporal continuum. And the consideration of the temporal continuum takes place at the Dakunta threshold of dialogue and community. And so we really get a refined sign model of universality. It becomes further refined through dialogue, and we're ready to move on to positing out of that universality. But if we're going to posit out of universality, it has to become an individual positing for our particular historical event that we're involved in. To posit the universal, it has to be posited in a praxis-type way that will apply to the historical situation. So we're going to close down that universality a little bit to an individual positing, and that puts us into 4a, the realm of positing, which takes place in the genus of body. And we will posit our ideal of universality of our soul as a form for enacting an act of existence. It's the form that will inform the act of existence. And it's a realm of positing, and the realm of positing is best described as an internal externality. It's just best understood as an internal externality. It's not really true subjectivity. It's think of it as a filter at the very forefront of your mind, a worldview through which you view all of reality. Kind of like your Christian worldview as a filter through which you view all of your historical reality. So it works in the objective world, so it is objective, but it is something that is part of your heart and your mind, so it is internal. So it's the realm of positing, it's the filter through which you're going to act. And it contains that ideal of what you want to enact in historical reality. Now from there, last time we talked about that the 3 moments in 4b of how the body becomes moved by the form. We talked about that composition of the natural forms that make up the body, and then the internalization of the form. And then after the internalization, we move on to higher perfection. And we found out that that the internalization of the form becomes a principle that is the foundation of our action, a principle. And so that's the new content for this time I want to bring up. We now have a new block. We actually have a new geometric section that we didn't have before. If you look just below that triad, I've got a block labeled 4c as the intrinsic principle of the act of existence. So before we do act, we move out of positing to intrinsic principle and then to action. We go from positing to intrinsic principle to action. So if you take a look at that intrinsic principle, the positive form is the intrinsic principle to the act. It's metaphorically described by Aquinas as soul in the heart. He calls it the soul in the heart, or the heart of our soul. It's the soul in the heart that makes up this principle of action. And he says that it does take up the notion of the eschatological end, or the trajectory of our action. It's eschatological directedness. So it's the imprinting of our act of existence with the eschatological temporal continuum of the horizon of the kingdom, the horizon of God's kingdom. And what this does, says Aquinas, is it emotively empowers the act. And it's called the eschatological contact of power. So this is the power of the act. The power is something like the power of promise. It's that eschatological goal of the future of the kingdom that becomes promise. Well, that promise becomes power. The eschatological end becomes an empowerment, an emotive empowerment that we're going to imprint our act with to empower it emotively. So it is an eschatological temporal continuum that gets imprinted on our act. And then in note 6, these principles of action that are abbreviated under the intrinsic principle will enact a process of the following. Action will actually be an infusing of form into inferior things in historical reality through a modality of diverse dispositions. So we might have many diverse means of implementing our ideal, but we're basically going to infuse the ideal form of the future of the kingdom onto our secular historical reality. We're going to infuse or imprint the form of the ideal of the spiritual kingdom onto and within historical secular reality. We're going to infuse form into inferior external reality. So it's an infusion of form into external circumstance. And that becomes the activity of the principle of the act of existence, which then takes us on to that act of existence is actually trying to accomplish a correspondence between the subjective intellect and the objective reality of the event, seeking a correspondence where we can actualize the kingdom in the real world. And then from there we move on to what we discussed before, the return. There is a return because there are hidden latencies and hidden potentialities that become actualized that we weren't previously aware of, and it opens up a new possibility for the kingdom. Well, that's going to be returned into the passion area of the possible intellect. It's going to be a return of new possibilities, new open doors, new realms of ministry, new realms of opportunities for service and opportunities for realizing the kingdom of God. We get an opening up through this actualization of hidden latencies and hidden potentialities of new opportunities for the possibility of the truth of God's kingdom, possibility for the true. And it puts us right back into possible intellect, where we will begin again by receiving that sentient information. And then we proceed a second time through the loop, and then a third time through the loop, and then a fourth time through the loop. And each time we'll go out of the intellect into the realm of positing, out of the realm of positing into the realm of the forming an intrinsic principle of how we're going to imprint and infuse external reality with the form of the kingdom. And then we're going to work. We're going to get involved in praxis, actual work of seeking correspondence between the ideal of the kingdom that we hold in our subjective minds and hearts and actual historical existence, a correspondence between intellect and thing. And then it'll happen again. There'll be another expansion because there's always a surplus of the promise of the kingdom. And so that surplus will continue to open up each time we go through the loop. There'll be a new expansion of promise, a new expansion of possibility, a new expansion of a latency we didn't see before, a potentiality we didn't recognize before. And so it's a circular process for Aquinas. But in this lesson, in the last lesson, the new we got was that triad for the body that talked about that principle of operation. Well, now in this lesson, he gave us more detail about intrinsic principle and what is intrinsic principle and how does it precede act. What does it mean to imprint something with the eschatological promise of the kingdom? Well, it creates emotive power. When you take the promise, the eschatological promise of the kingdom, and imprint your mission and imprint your action with that eschatological promise, that's an empowerment. That is an emotive empowerment that will help you to enact that ideal that you seek to posit. So he gave us a little bit more geometry, and believe it or not, that's why I wanted to do this separate lesson, because really we have added another block in geometry. So if we look at the chart now, we've actually increased our overall geometry. Now we've gone from the body sending out sensations to the sentient soul, from the sentient soul to phantasm, from phantasm to possible intellect, from possible intellect to generalization, from generalization to signification, And then from signification to forming a preliminary sign model. From preliminary sign model to the Dokunta threshold, and in the Dokunta threshold of dialogue, the expansion of the depth of signification, the refinement of universality, and then a positing of an individual praxis-based positing that we want to realize in reality in the realm of positing as the genus of body, and then internalizing that as a principle. Internalizing that as a principle which we learn is going to become an intrinsic principle of eschatological hope, an eschatological promise that we'll actually inscribe and infuse within the action in order to bring that forth as a correspondence between the ideal of God's kingdom and the secular historical reality. So we've added to the structure a little bit. Nothing huge, but we did add a little bit more content, and believe it or not, that puts us about 150 pages into the book.